Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple seconds that everyone gets in because I see the number of participants just going up right now. So I'm just going to wait 2 seconds or maybe 1 minute. Just by the time that everyone comes in. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you here. 15. I see just the number going up. So we're just going to wait a few more seconds to start. So while we're waiting, I'm going to say a couple sentences about AQED. If you're right here right now, it's probably because you know the association, but AQED is a volunteer citizen organization. We've been founded in 1997. And we represent today over 400, sorry, getting a bit excited, 2,500, maybe soon, 2,400 families, which represent probably over 5,000 families in Quebec. AQED is a nonprofit organization. And the goal actually our goal is to unite, inform, and support Quebec parents who choose to homeschool their kids. So we are very happy to have you here tonight because we're starting at least 2 months, 2 months and a half of conference every week or almost every week. We have a conference on Thursday night. So this is a rendezvous. Please mark your agenda every Thursday. Think about the conference offered by AQED. It's going to be until probably mid-June. Most of them are free for members, for AQED members, but there's a small fee for non-members. So it's maybe a good time to become an AQED member if you're not yet one. So I'm going to give you a really quick overview of what's planned for the next weeks as a conference. We will talk about the Quebec education program. We will talk about the materials, what you can use, what are the difference between like every type of materials you can use. So it's Catherine Léger who's going to give this conference. She's been doing that for many years. She's always giving this conference for AQED at the Congress. So at the symposium that we do usually in September. So if you attend, if you don't know what to choose, I bet you're going to have a lot of answer at our conference. We will also have a conference about the freedom to learn with the international expert Peter Gray. That's going to be on April 22nd. If you don't know Peter Gray, you can Google his name right now, and I'm sure you'll be really impressed and interested by his work. So I'm really suggesting you to be there on April 22nd. I think that's going to be really awesome. Then we're going to have like so many interesting conferences. I don't know if I can list them all, but we're going to talk about the confidence to be a parent educator. We're going to talk about how to own your homeschooling journey. And then we will also discuss with a French, André Stern. You might also have heard his name. It's someone who has never been to school. And he's always talking about like, what the kids they have into themselves, and then be able to just like l'émerveillement. So I don't know if there's actually a word in English for that. Is there one? L'émerveillement. I'm not sure. But that's something really specific that he's talking about, and he's French. But like that's a good actually opportunity to tell you that today it's a bit special because Noémi, she wanted to do the both conference, one in French and one in English. But for all the other conference that we're gonna have the translation. So we have some speakers that are English speaking people. So they will do, of course, their conference in English, and we're gonna have the translation in French. And then we have some speakers that are French speaking, and then we will have the translation for you in English. And then at the end of I was giving you like some examples. So I think we spoke about almost everything. The only thing we haven't spoke about is going to be the unschooling, and we're also going to talk about deschooling at the end of May, beginning of June. So I think that's it. Let's introduce the speaker for today because it's already 10 past 8. I'm not even sure if I have to introduce her actually, because she's been around AQED for like the past 5, 6 years. She's been a member of the board and then also the director of the organization. So we are really, really happy to have the privilege to have worked with this lady, Noémi Berlus. And apart from AQED, of course, Noémi Berlus is also a mother, of course. If she's talking about homeschooling, well, yeah, she's probably a mother. She's a mother of two children that have been homeschooling since 2013. And she's also the founder and president of Facile, lire, a publishing house, um, which offer books for the first readers in French. I don't think they have anything in English right now. No, everything is in French. But if you're looking for French readers books, those books are really appreciated in our community. They might have at least three or four different series already. So it's a great success. Welcome, Noémi. Thanks to be here tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Right back at you, Emily. Thank you to all the organizers. I've been at AQED for a while, and I know how much work goes into these conferences. So thank you, Emily, and thank you to all the other volunteers. And for you parents listening, if once you get comfortable with homeschooling and you're able to carve out a little bit of time, please consider paying it back forward, paying it forward, and volunteering at AQED as well. So I am just going to add a little bit to what Emily said in terms of my, presenting myself, just so you understand where I'm coming from when I give you my perspective on homeschooling and traditional schooling. And then I'm going to explain the process I went through with my family, with my son in particular, in trying many different things before landing on our current educational approach. And then I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of public and private and homeschooling. And then I'll be all yours if and when you have questions. I've been asked to start with the presentation and to reserve the questions at the end. So please do ask questions. If I don't have time to get to your question today, please do make sure you put it on the Facebook page on the video, on the post where the video will be. And I will go back and I'm going to answer every single question because I wish I could stay with you guys all night answering all your questions. All right. So first of all, as Emily said, I'm a mother of two children. My son is 14 and a half and my daughter is 10 and a half. I am a management consultant. I started my career as a consultant at Mercer Management Consulting, which is now called Oliver Wyman. And I spent the last 15 years after my 5 years there as independent consultant, so working on my own account. And I traveled around the world trying to solve problems that businesses had. So businesses would pay me, international companies. So I worked for companies like Philips, like Shell, pharmaceuticals. And my job was to help them solve problems that they weren't able to solve on their own. And so in that job, and as well as an entrepreneur, I founded kind of three different companies, two publishing companies, and my consulting company. I had employees and I would send teams to different places to solve problems. And throughout my career, I've had to hire. I must have been involved in the hiring process of over 100 people. I've seen hundreds of CVs. I've trained many dozens people, and I mostly hired people who came out of university, or depending on my publishing company, like I would hire people, young people who had different degrees and different levels of education. And so I feel like I have perspective on kind of what is expected on the marketplace. What skills do people need to have to succeed in order to be problem solvers, and in order to be creative, in order to become entrepreneurs. I also come from a family of educators. My husband is a professor. My mother was a professor for 35 years, and I have a lot of extended family that are in the education uh, system. And myself, I have studied education. I started a master's in education technology, so curriculum and educational materials, distance education. And I've also taken many pedagogy courses, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about education. Before I started homeschooling, before I started volunteering at AQED, I was already interested in education. And then once I started homeschooling at AQED, I read so many things on so many subjects in education. Have been director of AQED for 3 years, and I was the president of the board for 2 years before that. Um, I accompanied the government since 2016 when the previous minister of education was thinking of changing the laws around homeschooling. The minister called on me and the association to provide advice and to give feedback. I was the person who represented AQED on the consultation table, a roundtable, the National Consultation Roundtable on Homeschooling. And I'm often asked to talk about homeschooling in the media. I'm consulted by researchers. And I have conversations with researchers who are specialists in homeschooling. So I feel like I have a good kind of well-rounded experience and perspective on homeschooling and on the education system, because my son did go from public school to private school to what I call performance-based homeschooling, where we were really doing much more than what the program was expecting, to unschooling, and now doing the program with my oldest in order for him to get his high school diploma. I've tried a lot of things. I've also talked to hundreds of parents through my volunteering at AQED, in conferences like this, one-on-one, through my activities with my kids when we go to support groups and we go to homeschooling activities. I'm always talking about homeschooling. So I'm going to try to give you a data dump, as we would say in consulting, and give you as much information as I can about the process I went through and the pros and cons and what I observed in that process. I have to say that my children are gifted children. They've been diagnosed as having giftedness kind of profiles. Um, and um, and so I have children who learn quickly, and so my a lot of my conferences will be through that perspective. However, I do find there's a lot of commonalities, just in terms of children that don't fit the mold that school has. There's children, whether it's because they learn quickly, whether it's because they have a different kind of intelligence, whether it's a physical or creative or whatever, or whether they have particular challenges. If you're kind of not within that cookie cutter, if you're not between the 25th and 75th percentile and not within a specific profile, finding a school that will satisfy your child's needs may be more challenging. Um, and so I'm going to talk to you about about the challenges that our family had, and different ways we tried to solve them. And I hope it'll help you think through kind of your options. You've started a homeschooling maybe during the pandemic, and you'll have to think about what you're going to be doing with your children next year. So I hope that this will help. All right, so my son started school. We're francophone. We speak French at home, but I did have the eligibility. So my son started elementary school. He hadn't spoken French at all, English at all before he started school. He learned English at school. So school for the first 2 years was an amazing experience with my son. He learned how to read at school. He learned to feel comfortable in English. He learned to make friends in a big group. He learned about routine and about living in that kind of specific society. So school was really good for him at the beginning. Um, we had a great school. It was a small school in the eastern part of Montreal. The teachers were amazing. His kindergarten teacher made me think of Mary Poppins or like an English matron. She had long skirts and she was just amazing. I really liked her. When my son hit his second year, he had learned his English. He was now fully comfortable in English. Um, and after 3 weeks at school, he came home with a pile of drawings, like a huge pile of drawings. Like think of a photocopy, the bricks of photocopy paper. Like I felt it was the equivalent of a whole brick of photocopy paper that he'd filled up with various drawings. And I was kind of pleased because I thought, well, his fine motricity wasn't great, and he wasn't a huge drawer. So I thought, yay, he's practicing a skill that he doesn't really have. That's good. When he's at the daycare, he's drawing. That's good. They're making him explore different things. So I told them, hey, do you draw these things at daycare? And, after school, the after school and lunch daycare. He said, oh, no, mommy, I do this while I'm waiting for the other kids to finish their work in class. I was like, it's been 3 weeks. How did you fill up all this paper? That must have been the only thing you were doing during your classes. He shrugged. And I started to panic. Now, why would you panic? It's drawings. Why would you panic? Well, you have to understand my backstory. My backstory is I come from a gifted family. So everybody in my family that's been tested has tested gifted. And the boys the boys in my generation and below in my family, no boy has graduated high school with a higher than 65% average. And we've talked a lot about it over the years because I'm interested in education. My mother's an educator. And, my brother was one of those that finished with a 65% average. And he really did not thrive at the end of his schooling. And the reason my mother had always said, and my brother kind of agreed, was because they said school never taught my brother how to study, how to work hard, that things were too easy for my brother in school, in elementary school, and he learned basically that he could just guess the answer, he could get it right because just out of sheer brain power, and that he could open the book the night before and get an amazing grade in his exam. But when my brother hit high school, in the middle of high school, in like grade 9, there starts to be longer reports that you have to do. You have to have read the whole book. You have to have analyzed and compared, and you can't read the whole book the night before and then write the whole report the night before. You can't study all the material the night before and get an A on the exam. You can't. The sheer brain power isn't enough after a while. The higher you go in your education, and my brother had never learned the skills required to succeed in higher education. He had never learned the perseverance. He had never learned the planning. He had never learned those executive level kind of decision-making skills that he needed to be able to thrive at that level, because the work he was given before didn't require him to have those skills. And so overnight, he felt like he became stupid because, before he knew the answers, and before, people used to say that he had studied well because he got a good result. So he must have done good effort. And now he was doing the same things he was doing before, and he wasn't doing well. My brother had years and years of problems with drugs, with the law. My adolescence was hell, with my mother yelling all the time, my brother yelling back and banging doors, and my mother crying and me crying, and it was just hell. The environment at home was horrible. I ended up going to see a psychologist. It was just not an environment that was conducive to children thriving. And it was because my mom cared so much, and because she wanted my brother to do well, and she knew he could do well, and she was trying her best. And her best was, you have to fit in the system. And he was just a square peg in a round hole. And she tried to sand and buff and push that peg, and it just did not work. And afterwards, my brother tried to go to CEGEP. So with his 65%, he couldn't get into any CEGEP except where my mother worked, because my mother worked at a CEGEP. And back then, the CEGEP had kind of an informal policy that if the child of someone who worked there wanted to go there, they were in. They didn't, they had a back door. And my brother went through that back door 6 times. He tried to start his CEGEP 6 times, and he never finished CEGEP. And now he's 50 years old, and he has gone back to university, and he's been doing well, but he had to quit because of his job. He just couldn't afford to take the time off from work, and so now he's trying to do it part time. But I mean, he's going to be 70 when he finishes his university education. So, it turned out okay for my brother, but it took 30 years longer. And there were a lot of tears and there's a lot of regrets. And so, when I saw things were easy for my brother and for my son, and I remembered what my brother said, that school was too easy, uh, I, I broke down. I couldn't sleep for 2 months. I said, there's no way this is going to happen to my child. There's no way I'm going to let this happen. I solve problems. That is my career. I'm going to solve this problem. And maybe I'll make other mistakes, but at least it's not going to be the same mistakes, because the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so I went to talk to my brother. I talked to my mom, and I asked more questions. How did it work? Like, what did you do? What should I not do? And my brother told me that he, in grade 2, he skipped grade 2. He went from grade 1 to grade 3 because he was bright, and the school thought it was, the work was too easy for him. And in grade 3, it was a challenge, she said. In grade 3, skipping a grade was a challenge for 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, he'd learned how to make appropriate spaces between his words and his sentences, which he hadn't learned in grade 1. And, he figured out the conventions, and he caught up to the grade 3 kids. And after 3 weeks, he was bored again. And, the rest of the story. He was fine until he hit a wall in high school, and then it just went to the pits. It was horrible. So I went to meet the teacher, my son's teacher. I met the principal. I met the teacher, and the teacher did not. It tried to calm me down, but her answers did not calm me down. So I remember her telling me that my son asked a lot of questions, but not to worry because she answered every one of them. And my answer was, how? Because when my son asks me a question, it's how many how many drops of water are there in the universe? I can't answer that. I'm like, okay, it takes me like 45 minutes to answer it. And I'm Googling at night and I bring him back the answer the next day. You can't be Googling for 45 minutes because my son asked you that question when you have 20 other kids. I don't believe you when you tell me that you answer his questions to his satisfaction. Now, I didn't tell this to the lady because, this poor teacher is trying to do her best. But, my son would come home with his vocabulary list to learn for the next week. He would have to learn the words for the Monday, and I would sit him down on the Monday that he would receive his list, and I'd say, "Okay, let's do the words and let's see what you have trouble with," and he'd get it perfect. So I'd be like, "Okay, I guess we have nothing else to do for the week." So we do nothing for the week, and then the next Monday he would do the test, and he'd get 9 out of 10 right. And he'd come home with his like the star on his thing and the ribbon and the whatever and the bravo, you must have studied hard. And I knew he did zero studying. He didn't learn anything in this exercise. He already knew how to write the words before he went into the class. He didn't have to learn, overcome anything. He didn't have any challenge. There was nothing there. There was no meat for him to feed on. And then I wouldn't know what to say because my kid got 90%. He got 9 out of 10. I should be thrilled. I should be thanking, congratulating him. But I know that he should have gotten 100%. So what do I say? Good job? I don't feel like he did a good job because he must have been picking his bum or something. How come he got this mistake? I know he knew how to read it, how to write it, so he wasn't paying attention. But at the same time, I can't tell him you need to get 100%. That's crazy. Like, what kind of stress am I giving the 7-year-old? So I felt really unauthentic with my son in the school at school because I kind of couldn't tell him to try to surpass himself because there was nothing to surpass with except like focusing more. But he's 7. What do you want? Like, I'm not going to be crazy and expect him to get 100% all the time. So I just didn't know what to do with it. And the discussion with the teacher didn't help. And I spoke to other parents, and the parents were telling me how the words were too hard for her son. I remember sitting next to someone, and she said, those spelling tests. And I was like, yeah, the spelling tests. And she's like, they're too hard for my son. There should be only 5 words because he can't understand, like he can't get them. He's failing them. And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't know what to say because I was like, they're easy for my son. So this one lady was like, that 10 words is too much for my son. Her son didn't belong in that class. And I'm like, my son needs harder words. Like, it's not even he needs more words. He just needs harder words. Because once you know what, rat, sat, fat, mat, and pat, once you understand the concept of that consonant and the 2 letters after that, like, I don't care how many words you put on that list, he's going to know how to spell them all. So stop it. Let's get some OUGHs in the spelling test or something. So, so that didn't work. So we met with the director of the school. I cried. I looked like I was a crazy lady. I bet she, I'm so embarrassed. I cried my eyes out. I cried my family, my baggage out in front of this poor director. She didn't know what to do with me. And then I left. In the meantime, as soon as I saw there was this issue, I had started shopping around for private schools. I figured when a kid is too smart, you send them to private school. That's what you do. And the director was like, there isn't much we can do. We can have him skip a year. Let me see. I'm going to have to get the psychologist. It's going to take a while. It's a process. It's not easy to skip a year in the system. And here I am thinking, well, my brother skipped a year and it didn't help. So I'm going to have to fight and, go through this process in order to give the same solution that didn't help my brother. So when the private school near our house called and said, oh, there's a spot, I said, I'm not going to wait and see what the public school has to offer. because the best that they can offer probably isn't going to be enough. So I sent my son to the private school, up to a private French school. So I figured, he learned English. Now he's going to go to French school. That's going to be a challenge. And he went to a private French school that had an advanced French programs. They prided themselves on the difficulty, or the fact that their students were so advanced in French. So he went from an Anglophone school to a French school. And a week after he arrived, because he arrived in the middle of the year, they had their first test on the avoir and être verbs, the conjugation. And my son did not even know what a conjugation was. He didn't know that verbs could change. Like orally, he knew because we spoke French at home, but the concept of like the ending, the ent at the ending, or the er and accent, like he had no idea about any of that. And he had a week to learn it. And finally, for the first time in his life, my son had a challenge, and he flipped out. The first time I tried to explain conjugations to him, after 30 seconds of explaining, because he didn't understand it right that first second, he was on the floor, the bacon, like a 2-year-old that doesn't want to take a bath, like flipping out, bacon, full on tantrum. I don't understand this. I'm stupid. I'm never going to get it. And I'm like, okay, kid, like you need to take a cold shower because I've explained something for 30 seconds and you don't understand it. Like there are kids, like think of your friend at school who after a week didn't know how to write his 10 words. Do you know how much he's working and how stupid he must feel like he is? Like you telling yourself that you're stupid because you don't understand something in 30 seconds is arrogant. I'm thinking all this. Of course, I'm not saying this to a 7-year-old, but I'm like, this child has to live a challenge in it because he's going to be completely misadjusted. And the first time that he's going to have a challenge in life, he's going to freak out like this. It took 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, he knew how to conjugate, and he had caught up to their kids in French school. English at a French school was a laugh because he can't come from an English school. So, he was writing compositions in grade 2 in English school. And now at the French school, he was learning his colors in English. So the English was a joke. And my son is gifted, spatial giftedness. So math is something that's easy for him. So the teacher was using him to help correct the work of the other kids. So as I was looking at it, I said, okay, so the private school gave him the challenge that we wanted. It lasted 3 weeks. I don't see any other challenge that's going to arrive until grade 9. So he's going to, this isn't going to help him. The only classes that are at his level are the French classes because he's still, he was in English last year. Eventually he'll get better than the other kids in French too, because his learning curve is faster. That's what it is for him. And I was like, and I'm paying $3,000 a year for him to have slightly challenging French classes because nothing else is challenging for him. For $3,000 a year, I bet I can pay someone to teach him, tough French. So why am I doing this? And so we spoke to the private school about skipping a year. The private school said that it didn't happen because their program was challenging enough that they didn't need to skip a year. They also said that the only time they'd ever done it was once in the last 17 years. And that if we wanted to consider it, we needed to have a psychologist recommendation. So we went to see the psychologist, and we were speaking to the teacher, and we were speaking to direction. And all this time, I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling guilty because I'm pushing these schools to do better for my child. My child is bright. There's children who need help, who are struggling, not because they're too bright, but because they have more problems. The teacher has 26 kids to manage. I am being a pain in the behind for these teachers, And I sympathize with these teachers. It's not their fault. I'm not comfortable going and trying to advocate for my child. I know that all the children in the class need personalization, and my child isn't any more special than the others, and the teacher can't do what my son needs. So what do I do? Do I keep going, being a pain and fighting with the system and feeling uncomfortable because I'm asking for things that are not reasonable? Or do I compromise on my child's education? You know? Um, and I didn't want to be a pain, but I didn't want to give my child a subpar education. And I certainly didn't want to repeat the nightmare that was my adolescence in a home with children, a boy that did not want to study, and that was being forced to do things, and that was scraping by the, you know, I guess scraping through, and not being in a position after 10, 11 years of education of doing something with their life that would be an actualization, that would be edifying for them. Like I don't care what my son wants to do, but I want him to do something with his life that he's going to be excited about and that he's going to like. My brother throughout his life has had what I call student jobs. He's done surveys, phone surveys. He did phone surveys, telemarketing for years. He worked in a warehouse carrying boxes and moving boxes. And now he's 50 years old. He's a supervisor of other people who push boxes. I mean, he's much happier than he is now, than he was back then. But I don't feel like he's accomplished everything that he would have wanted to accomplish in his career. Um, and so I was looking for something different for my son, and I didn't believe that the system was going to be able to give it to him. The psychologist that we met confirmed that homeschooling might be the best solution for our son, or that he needed a lot of adaptations at school. I didn't see, based on the conversations I had with the school, I did not see those adaptations being something that was fair to ask of the school, considering the system and what's available for the kids in class. And I was never going to be satisfied with the little adaptation they would be able to do. So we decided to bring it home. And then at home, I would, the psychologist said my son needed to be stimulated. He needed more stimulation and more. I was going to give him more. I was top of my class at McGill. I was a rising star in my firm. I started my own firm. I was going to solve my son's problems like no one had ever solved their kids' problems before. I was going to take all my management consulting skills and everything that these companies paid me tons of money to do, and I was going to manage the heck out of my son's education. So I got all the books. I got all the books. When I started homeschooling, there was a educational library. There used to be an educational bookstore. There was an editor, I think it was on Saint Denis, that used to sell school books, but to the public. It was just like a bookstore, but for school books. And they were closing their shop, and so everything was like 70% off. I bought all the books. I bought all the books all the way to high school because I was like, it's cheap, so I'm gonna buy all the books. And I had money because I was working and getting paid a lot, so I bought all the books. And I created a beautiful program. I had Excel spreadsheets and a Word document with tables and check marks, and I was going to performance manage the heck out of my homeschooling. And then I had money, so he was going to go to this activity, and he was doing music and learning programming and learning Italian. And I had tutors for this and for that and for the other. And my brother was enthusiastic. My mother was a philosophy teacher. She was going to teach him ethics and religious culture. My husband is a French literature professor. He was going to teach French. My finance degree and my English skills, I was going to teach him English. And we had a music specialist and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so top notch. And everybody was super excited to teach this super prodigy. Everybody was 100% in. except the main participant. My son spent 2 years looking at the best quality education money could buy in the most personalized education and going, do I have to do this? How long do I have to do this before I can play my game? Not that. Oh, that end scene. That was my son for 2 years. The sucker of enthusiasm, the kill joy of education, the I could care less what you've done for me. What you've done sucks, and don't talk to me about it. Um, when I saw all this was happening with my son, like the whole schooling thing, I had I had a break in my cases because I get a client that calls and I work for 9 months and then I don't work, or I work for 3 months and it pays for the rest of my year. So I had like a 6 months when I was really very close to my son and seeing what he was doing all day. And I was spending my days with my son, and yeah, we were doing activities and going to community centers and everything. But I was there all day, whether at the community center or at home. And my son did the best imitation of a wet rag that anybody has ever done. We would go to community center, and the kid, we would go to Community Day, a center here in Montreal, and the kids would be doing stuff like building a robot that spread batter to make pancakes on a hot plate. And they would build the robot out of Lego, Meccano, whatever Lego pieces, and they would program the robot to distribute the batter on the hot plate in the shape of the name of the kids. And I was like, that is so cool. Go do that. Go do that. How long do I have to do it before I'm allowed to stop? They'd bring in someone who they dissect brains. Go do that. Do I have to? Gross. I'd get tutors that were enthusiastic, like young men who would play guitar and show him stuff, and they'd be like, after a year of teaching him, in March, actually it was less than a year, I was crying every night. I was doing everything I could to make my son want to learn, and I was doing the most interesting things that I could come up with, and looking up different ways and trying different books, and it just wasn't working, and I was failing as a homeschooler. My son was doing well in terms of, on paper, he was progressing well. He was doing a lot of work and he was writing the stuff, but he was always doing the minimum required. I knew he could do so much better. He was doing fine because his minimum is good compared to other people, or other kids his age. He was doing fine, but he wasn't doing creative. He wasn't doing enthusiastic. He wasn't doing original. He wasn't doing a smidgen more than what was required in order to keep me off his back. On paper, the dam would have loved him. The government would have loved him. I could have shown anybody, what he was doing, and everybody would have been thrilled and said, "You're a great homeschooler." My son was unhappy, and he was making everybody in the family unhappy. And I knew that I could push him, but only for so long. And so I said, okay, I must be a horrible homeschooling mom. Okay, people have strengths and weaknesses. I can find my mojo somewhere else, and okay, fine. So I started taking job contracts again, and my husband took a semester where he only took one out of his normal 3 classes, and he started homeschooling my son. And after a year, in March, he wasn't crying, but when I would come home, he'd be white. He'd be like white like a sheet, and he'd be like, I was like, are you okay? And that's when I realized that it wasn't me and it wasn't him. It was the situation. Something wasn't working, and it wasn't because we weren't good enough. My husband is an amazing teacher. He gets great ratings on Rate My Teacher and those websites. Like anytime he asks of reviews of his students after they've finished, like he gets great scores. So I know he's a good teacher. He was a clown in a past life, and so I know he knows how to make things fun. And I've listened to his classes, and he's a good teacher. So it's not him. I thought maybe it was me, but I guess if it's not him, it must not be me either. Something's wrong. And then I kept going to the community centers and talking to families who homeschool their children with different approaches. And I would look at the kids who would be excited about the batter and the robots and dissecting the brains. And there were kids who were always on these things and always excited about it. And I talk to the parents and say, how do you do that? Because I want one of those kids. Like, I really love my son, but can we like do a lobotomy and change that part of their brain? And I want that one. And oh, okay, sorry, I was looking at that comment. And my son and I was seeing like these other parents that weren't killing themselves with all the books and all the material and trying to shove all that into their kids' brains. They were just letting their kids go, and their kids were going, and they were going further than my kid, and they were being more creative and curious and entrepreneurial and all the skills that I want when I'm hiring someone. And I was talking to the parents, and they were telling me about how they were unschooling and or how they were more relaxed. Some of them were not unschooling, but they were just not trying as hard, not pushing as hard. And their kids were going further than mine was. Um, and I started reading about unschooling. And the book that really convinced me is the book by Peter Gray. It's called Free to Learn. And I'm so glad Peter Gray will be doing a presentation in the next few weeks at AQED. I think he's an amazing speaker. I've heard him, and I've read his material. He's really very compelling, and he's very fact-based and research-based. There's some people who like more kind of experiential stuff, but I'm very Cartesian, and my research kind of side, I needed that reassurance. And so I was like, okay, well, I thought it was hippies and religious freaks that used to before I started homeschooling. I thought that you were all hippies, and we were all hippies and religious freaks. And then I started homeschooling, and I saw there were a lot of super smart people who homeschooled and who had thought very deeply about education and who made very well educated decisions about how they were going to educate their children. And then when I started homeschooling, I thought that only hippies unschooled. You had to smoke pot to be an unschooler. That was like a prerequisite. But then after 2 years of being surrounded, I guess I drank the Kool-Aid, and I was realizing it didn't work at home the way I was trying to do it. And I was seeing the results that unschoolers were getting. And so I went to see my husband, and I said, you know what? I've been reading this book, and I'm feeling it. Maybe we should try it. But in my mind, I knew my husband was going to say, no, are you nuts? Like, we're educators. We're going to tell our kids not to get educated. Like, are you crazy? I was going to see my husband so he would talk me out of it. And he read the book, and he said, you know what? Maybe we should try. And I was like, no, you're supposed to talk me out of it. Like, you're going to drag me into this. And so we tried for a week. We said for a week, we said, we're not going to unschool, but what we're going to do is we're going to relax more. We're going to give him 20 minutes of work per day instead of several hours of work. We're just going to give him the bare minimum required. He's going to be happy because it's a lot less than what we used to give him. And for us, it'll give us that little assurance. We'll do half unschooling. We'll do unschooling most of the day, but 20 minutes, just that kind of security belt. And that lasted like 3 days, because the first day, my son was like, oh, only 20 minutes. Great. After 5 minutes. Okay, I did 5 minutes. Can I do 5 minutes of screen now? You have 20 minutes to do. Come on. And then I would argue with him for half an hour to do the next 5 minutes. And I was like, no, the return on my investment is not big enough for me to be fighting all day for him to do just 20 minutes. Before I would fight all day, but at least he'd do a full day of work. Now I'm fighting all day and he's only doing 20 minutes. Might as well just give up. And so, at that point, it was my husband who was homeschooling, and he was, like I said, white as a sheet. And so after 3 days, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I know that if I sit on my son long enough, he'll do the work. But how long can I sit on my son? He's 9 now. How long is it going to last? At 13, at 14, at 15, when he's going to be taller, bigger than me, stronger than me. Can I sit him down and say, do your work because? I don't believe so. And I saw my brother, what happened when we forced him. I saw my cousin. Yes, he's going to get his diploma, but what's going to happen after? The minute he turns 16 and he's not allowed, not forced to be sitting there, he's going to be gone. He's going to be banging the door and he's going to say, goodbye. I am done with this controlling family and I'm going to go do my own thing. And it wasn't working either. So I was dragged kicking and screaming into unschooling. It was not something that was like, oh yes, we're going to do it because it's going to be nice for our family and all that. It was like, there was no other option. And my husband and I said, it is impossible that with our genes. I mean, we started companies together. My husband wrote musicals and he won poetry contests and he was a clown. And, we've built so many things together. He writes books and we are self-starters. We are entrepreneurs. We bite into life and we do projects and we thrive by projects. It is impossible that our son got our genes and there isn't in there somewhere a self-starting thing. It's just we are smothering it. We are not leaving room for that flame to grow and for him to take his own place in life. And so we started unschooling. And my husband, I had read a lot more on unschooling than him. I had read that you should go gradually and just start by saying yes more often when your child asks for something. Like, yes, you can go to bed later. Yes, you can have, you can skip this, and just say yes more often, and go gradually into saying yes to as much as you can. But my husband was like, okay, kids, from now on, we're unschooling, so you can do whatever you want. So now, overnight, we went from super controlling, like, we expect you to listen to your parents and do what we say. And when we say jump, and you jump, you ask how high, and otherwise it's in the corner, and I count to 5, and, training to, you are the master of your life, and we will discuss and negotiate anything and everything. It was a bit of an adjustment. I was kind of upset at my husband. That night, my son went to bed super late. My daughter wasn't so bad because she was 5, so we were able to adjust. But the first 2 weeks was really rough. The first 2 weeks, my son watched the most stupid shows from morning to night on the computer. He would watch shows like the prank shows with people kicking each other in the privates, and someone going into a shopping cart and being pushed into traffic, and the most useless, horrible things. And my husband and I were holding on to each other going like, oh, are we going to survive this? Can we actually let our 9-year-old look at all this crap forever? Like, how are we going to survive? But what else can we do? And it says you have to give it time. So I guess we'll have to give it time, but I'm going crazy. But then after 2 weeks, I started seeing my son start looking at stuff that was more intellectual. He started watching clips on science experiments. He started watching, listening to shows about people analyzing movies and talking about either ethical things or the scientific angles or why this movie could work and that or how the movie was made or things like that. He started playing games that required more strategy, more strategic thinking. One of the reasons I had started unschooling as well was I would fight for hours to get him to do a worksheet. But then when he would ask me to play a game, we would play Magic, which is this game with points and cards and things. And you have to have so many points and to be able to fight the other person. And my son would look, if I turn around and he would get a glimpse of my cards, he would tell me what card to play until the end of the game. And he would just tell me, Mom, let's just stop. You're going to lose. I say like, I'm not going to lose. And he'd say, no, because the best card you can play is that one. And I have this card. And then the next is this one. And then that one. And then that one. And he would game the whole thing until the end. And I was like, he's doing algebra in his head because he needs to figure out, I have 30 hit points or life points. And he needs to know how many cards he needs to use to remove my 30 points. And he has 5 of these cards and 3 of these cards that have these points. So it's pure algebra. And he's able to calculate in his head and both my calculation and his calculation and figure out which one's going to get to it at the first. But he's not able to finish a multiplication sheet. Like, why am I fighting with him to do the multiplication sheet when his pastimes require more mental acuity than his current work? And so, he started doing stuff that was more intelligent. He still watched some stupid stuff, that I considered stupid. But in the 4 years where he basically spent the whole time in front of a computer looking at different things, I would insist that he do a sport. So he would go out once a week and do some kind of activity. He didn't necessarily like it, but for a long time, it was kind of, for my mental health, I need to see you move once in the week. He would also go once a week to a community center where he'd see other kids. Because again, for my mental health, he had a lot of friends online, but I needed him to see some people in person just because I need to feel like I'm not a completely horrible mother. So he would do that because that was kind of my baseline. But then the rest of the time, he would just spend the time in front of his computer. But over time, what happened is that the less I nitpicked about things, the more he respected my opinion when I did say something. So, and the less I forced him to follow my opinion, the more he was willing to follow my advice. So at the beginning, for example, he stopped brushing his teeth. It would drive me nuts. He would do it once in a while, but it was not at all consistent. So I moved up the dentist appointment. And when he went to the dentist appointment for a regular cleaning, he ended up being on that chair for an hour and a half to clean out all the gunk that he had not brushed. And I asked the dentist to explain to us what would happen if he didn't brush his teeth. And the dentist came out with the book of all the gum diseases and all the mouth diseases and like a whole bunch of gross mouth. And he gave us a science class on how the bacteria worked and how the fluoride worked and the brushing worked. And we went through all the machines in the dentist and we really had an in-depth conversation about dentistry. And he completely grossed us all out on the diseases and things you could get if you didn't brush your teeth. And after that, my son would put a timer on to make sure that he brushed his teeth for a whole 2 minutes. And he's the one who tells me when we run out of floss. So me telling him to brush his teeth was not as powerful as letting him learn his lesson. The same thing happened when he was 9 years old and we were starting with the homeschooling. He, at some point, a couple of months in, he decided he wanted to experience a sleepless night. He wanted to stay up the whole night. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a horrible parent letting my 9-year-old not sleep. But we're like, okay, we're going to trust the process. We're supposed to trust our children and their instincts. And so he worked at it, which I thought was pretty funny because there's no way he would work for any schoolwork, but he was like determined to try to not sleep one night. So he went to bed later every night that he would plan. He's like, I'm going to go to sleep at 10. Now, next day at 11, next day at 12. And like 3 or 4 nights later, we woke up the next morning at 7 a.m. and my son was in front of his computer going, and he turned to my husband and he said, I have no idea why someone would want to stay up all night. And then for the next year, he went to sleep at later than he usually went to sleep, but not like 5 hours later. Like at a time for a child that doesn't have to wake up the next morning at a specific time, that was decent. Like that was reasonable, and he was getting a reasonable amount of sleep. And I was like, okay, so the fight on going to bed was solved in 1 week instead of me fighting for what I thought was right for the next 5 years. And a lot of the logical things that are really matter, I find get solved by themselves once you let the kid live the consequences, you know? Um, and now, and every time I would tell him, like, if you don't sleep, you're going to be tired and you're going to be grumpy and you're not going to be happy, but he had to live it. But once I let him live those consequences for a couple of years, now that he's older, he respects my opinion more. So when I tell him, look, there's a wall there, you're walking towards a wall, you're going to bang into that wall, you see that wall, that brick, it's there. He doesn't go like, mom, whatever, and then run into the wall. He's like, okay, like she's warned me about walls before, and they've been there when I've hit them. So maybe I need to listen to her this time. But the secret was letting him hit the wall. And so by not letting our children live the consequences of their bad mistakes, they never learn how to make good decisions when they're young. And right now, with my hindsight, I'd say I'd rather my kids make the bad decision when they're 9 and 10 and they learn the consequences when they're not going to be running around smoking pot at 9 and 10. The bad decision is going to be not brushing their teeth, not eating when the supper is ready, and not going to bed on time. Like, the consequences to those things are not that bad. But I want that when he's going to be 16 and I'm going to tell him, like, wear a condom, don't do hard drugs, don't drink and drive. I want him to listen then, because then it's his life that's going to be in danger. And he listens more. He pays attention, he respects. The more I respect his decision-making process, the more he respects the advice that I give him. The more that I focus my advice on the things that really matter, that really, really matter, that I pick, kind of my battles, the more those lessons are learned. Okay, so that was for the unschooling portion. When my son was 13 and a half, May 28th, he wanted money. AQED was closing its center because of the pandemic. We had to close the center last year. And I couldn't ask a bunch of volunteers to come because we were all in isolation. We weren't supposed to be with other people. So AQED accepted to pay my son minimum wage to come and help me pack up the AQED center. And so my son came, and he was planning on doing the whole day because he wanted to buy whatever. And so he was going to work until, he's like, I'm going to work until 7. And I'm like, okay, well, let's work till 7. 2 hours in, packing boxes. It was hot. It was muggy. We're middle of May, dusty, packing books. My son is like, I want to go home. This is inhuman. No one should be paid minimum wage to pack boxes like this. When I'm an adult, I'm going to be paid more to pack boxes, and you're taking advantage of me. I said, listen, son, if you don't get a diploma, if you don't get qualifications in something, you don't have to have a diploma, but you have to either go into programming, become an artist, become an entrepreneur, do something get some kind of qualification, whether it's school or elsewhere. This is what is in store for you. This is what people who only have a high school diploma, who scrape by, or who don't have a high school diploma do in life. And they have bosses that are much tougher than I am. You're going to have the boss with the pack of cigarettes and the shoulder there telling you when you can go to the bathroom. That's what it's going to happen if you don't get qualifications. Someone who is not as smart as you is going to be telling you what to do, and you might not agree with what they say, but you're going to have to do it. And I saw the gerbils. He went home. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Well, it's one more lesson I've taught him, but yeah, I forgot about it. The next day, May 29th, my son came to me and said, Mom, I'd like to start studying formally. I was like, okay, yeah, okay, fine. I started printing stuff off the internet. I was like, this is going to last 3 days. I started printing stuff off the internet. Like, well, okay, there's some free stuff. I'm not going to buy more books. Are you crazy? I spent like thousands of dollars 10 years ago, and then I ended up giving all those books away because I wasn't using them. I'm not going to buy more books because he's decided he wants to study. I'm going to get stuff on the internet. I'm going to prepare stuff, and we'll see. A week later, a month later, it's still there. September comes around. He's still studying every day. He doesn't like it, but he's forcing himself to study. I tell him, oh, okay, well, you're impressed. You've been serious about this and you've been studying. If we're going to continue doing this, do you want to go get your diploma? You might as well, because you're doing the work. He's like, yeah, I'd like to get my high school diploma. So I found out what the books were that he needed to do to be able to do the exams. He told me he wants to do the minimum required in order to get his high school diploma. I'm fine with that. The minimum required is still learning quite a few things, and he's going to learn to work hard, because when my brother was in grade 9, my son's in grade 9 now, he hit his wall. My son is asking me to scale the wall now. He's asking me to do these things that at the moment my brother was giving up, it's the moment where my son is asking to do it. It's been a year. He's been working. Not every day. See, he takes 4 or 5 days off once in a while. He takes weekends off. Sometimes it drags on, and it's been like 3 weeks since he's really done a lot, but then he'll do a boost and he'll catch up. He'll still roll his eyes and be like, oh, Mom, why did you give me so much? Why do I have to learn the Pythagoras theorem? But I'm super authentic with him. I'm like, I've never used it. Sometimes I tell him, you know what? You have to learn it, because when your kid has to learn it, you'll be able to teach it to them. That's what I used it for. But I'm like, sweetie, do you want the diploma or not? I'm not the one who decided what's in this. I'm not going to have to defend it. There's a lot of stuff that you have to learn that I think are going to be really useful. There's some of the stuff I don't know if it's going to be useful, but it might. And there's some stuff I'm pretty sure it's not going to be useful, but I'm not going to start parsing it, because it's all on the exam. So do you want to get your diploma or not? That is what you're studying it for. And, he can't argue with me. I'm not trying to pull one over him and try to pretend that he's learning all of it and 100% of it is going to be useful for him in the future. It's, do you want your diploma or not? And so he realizes that I'm not trying to defend the system. I'm just trying to help him work through the system so that he can do what he wants to do in the future and what he's able to do. Sometimes he'll be like, Mom, why did you give me so much work? And I'm like, look, there's so many chapters. The exam is in so much time. I divided the chapters by the amount of time left. You are free to look at the process and analyze what I did and readjust the work, like the timing, but this is what it is. And then he looks and he's like, I don't want to have to plan. Like, I'll let my mom plan. So he's like, what can you do? I am not the resistance. I am not the thing that is fighting or forcing him to do stuff. I tell him, look, I'm super glad that you're doing this, but if you're mad and you don't want to do it, like, don't yell at me, just don't do it. Like, what do you want me to say? You're the one who chose to do this now. I'm super glad, but I'm not going to accept being yelled at because you're not happy. It's like, this is what you asked for. And the other thing I tell him is, look, if you don't do this studying now, you choose to do it later, you need to find yourself. I'm going to support you in whatever you want to do. But when you're going to be 20 or 22, if you want to go back to school, I'm not going to be there tutoring you. Like, the opportunity is now to have my help. later on, I might help you find the program, but you're going to have to work with the whatever center or whatever is available. And maybe you'll have to pay for some of your courses. I'm not going to pay for your stuff when you're 22, not if you skip the 6 years and you're going back. But if you study, I'm going to support you when you're studying. But when you turn 16, if you're not studying, you're going to start paying rent. Because at 16, you can work. And there's no way I'm going to have someone sitting in my couch playing computer games all day while I'm working to pay the rent. So either you're studying and then I'll support you. And I'd rather you didn't work, so I'll support your studies, or you're paying for your room and board. And so he knows that there are decisions, and he's learned how to make hard decisions. He's learned that I am willing to let him fail because it's the only way I could get him to care. And so so he's decided that he doesn't want to fail. And he's doing super well. We've gotten his first grades back, and we're doing some advanced courses this year. So we're doing a grade 4, secondary 4, grade 10 and grade 11 course this year, even though he's in grade 9, because we're front ending some of his courses. So he have less, like we're trying to get his credits over 3 years instead of 2. And his first 2 assignments, he's gotten 95% and a 90%. And that's after 5 years of not doing anything formal. He's been able to get back into it and he's thriving. We'll see if it'll last the whole time, but I'm much more confident and comfortable in our position now than I was when he was 9, even though he was ahead of others when he was 9. Okay, so quickly, the pros and cons of the different approaches. Okay, the main one I'm going to talk about is public school. So public school, it's a turnkey solution. You send your child there and you don't have to worry because the school is taking care of him, and you don't have to worry about what's in the program or not, and what's in the exams and whatever. You send them there, you drop them off, and you come back and you're like, oh, you got educated today. There's a minimum level of education that's happening. There's specialists. So when you get to high school, there's subjects that you don't know. The specialists are teaching your child. There are many children at school. My daughter tried school this year, and she said the one thing that she really enjoyed about school for the month that she was there is that there were multiple kids of her age. And so she was able to find the 3 or 4 kids that had the same interests as her. In homeschooling, there's much more multi-generational, there's much more multi-age, which I think is great. And my daughter enjoys as well. But when she's looking for kids her age, there's maybe 4 or 5 kids in the group that are girls her age. And so out of those 4 or 5 kids, they might not have the same interest as she does. So it's less stressful because you don't, if things are good in school, if your child fits the mold, it's less stressful because you don't have you don't have the risk of, if I mess up, will I end up having the youth protection services? Like, you don't have to worry about those things. Am I messing up my child? If your child fits in that mold in school, it can be kind of more relaxing to send them at school because it's not my fault if they mess it up. However, if your child has any kind of special needs, then that mold can be extremely stressful. So I don't want to say it's less stressful for all parents. If your child has very big learning issues, sending them to school can be beneficial if the resources are there. So if your child is really the child that has the worst problems in the class, they will probably get resources to help them. And it can be a lightening of a load. Like it can be very hard for a parent to help a child that has a lot of needs at home. Now, that is contingent on the school actually having resources. So of course, this does not apply to all parents who have children with special needs, since we know that the resources are limited at school. It's free. Although it's free, but with this year when I was looking for my daughter, like the uniform, the extra books, the school materials, the outings, and the class, the lunch supervision, it adds up quickly. And I'm not sure, especially if you're unschooling, whether one is more expensive than the other, especially in pandemic. After the pandemic, what really makes the budget expensive when you homeschool is the activities, like after school activities, or gymnastics or whatever you sign your child up to, and outings. But I think that they enrich your child's education so much, it's totally worth it. So I'd rather, if I have $500 to spend, I'd rather spend it on outings and activities than on uniforms and like rulers. And then the advantage of private school is, I think it's a little bit more personalized in that private schools have a bigger variety of different kinds of programs. So you can pick a private school that is better at French or better at the arts or better at whatever it is that your child is interested in. Um, and you might have a little bit more control in a private school in terms of, like, in a public school, you can't travel when you want, but in private school, as long as you pay for catch up, you can travel when you want. One of the things that I found really tough at school in general was I didn't have flexibility in terms of, like, if my daughter was sick one morning and I was late bringing my son to school, he got a red thing in his agenda, and after 3 red things, he'd get in trouble. And like, he's 7, he's not the reason that we're late. It's always my fault. Give me the red square. No, it's my child getting the stigma and punished because I'm not well organized, or I take on too much, basically. So that I found was not pleasant. Plus, forcing my child to do homework that wasn't what he needed to do. He would say, "Mom, why do I have to do this homework? I already know the material." And I couldn't tell him, "Don't do the homework," because if you send your child to school, you have to buy in, you have to support the teacher, you have to. But I had no other reason than to say, well, the teacher asked you, because I knew he knew how to do the homework. He knew that I knew that he knew how to do the homework. And so it was just this whole big kind of con game of trying to force him to do something that I thought was useless and that he thought was useless. And so I find it's easier to be authentic in homeschooling with your child. But in conclusion, I'd say there's no mistakes. I mean, you can try homeschooling for a while longer. You can try school for a while, bring your child back to home if it doesn't work. The one thing I would tell you is, make sure you keep trying things until you see that your child is happy. A happy child learns better. A happy child makes the home environment better, makes your children more confident, makes it makes them want to learn more stuff. It makes them curious. It creates learners for life. It creates great associations, positive associations with learning. You don't want something they're learning to be something that they stop when they're 16 years old. And frankly, if your child isn't ready at 16, but they're a lifelong learner, they will surpass all the other children at 20 regardless. So I would say, don't stop until you find what works. If you have a child that is unhappy, or a family that is unhappy because of the education, keep trying different things until you find what makes your it work for your child. And it might not be the same answer for each child, but make sure you keep trying until you have your child and your family is happy, because that's what's going to make them learn. So that's it. I'm sure there's quite a few questions. Let me look at the questions. Yeah, the world, l'émerveillement that you were talking about, Emily, was it's to marvel. Cynthia, I can't believe people listen to my 2 presentations at once. Emily, do you want to tell me what the questions are, or should I read them?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a long comment from Sandra Reed, so I don't know if you want to read it, because it's a long comment. She doesn't want to say it herself because I asked her. So maybe we can read it.
Okay, I can read it. So Sandra says, my son is in grade 9. It's our first year homeschooling. Everything you said about your son in elementary school was exactly my son. Everything was easy, 0 effort required on his part. I've been told many times how bright he is. Yeah, I've heard that too. I've been told the word potential comes up a lot. I feel like it's a swear word. I've been told many times how bright he is. High school, his grades went down from 90s to low 80s to low 70s. Every year it got worse. He doesn't pay attention to his classes. Yeah. He puts minimal effort into projects and assignment. Yeah. His English teacher told me that something that would take another student weeks to produce, he could write it a night before in an hour. Yeah. This year I've been focused on my grade 4 daughter who was on IEP at school and still couldn't read last March. I have her at grade 3 level right now. She's reading and it's amazing, but I haven't been challenging my eldest. I really want him to do well and be challenged. How? What can I do to make him excited? He's just going through the motions right now, working through worksheets and doing whatever work Quebec Online School gives him. Zero motivation. Sandra, it's tough now because he's older. So you've gotten into this groove that's hard. It was hard for me to get my son out of it when he was 9. So if he's a teen now, uh, it's a question you should also ask Peter Gray in 2 weeks when he comes, because I'd be curious to hear what he has to say. I haven't lived through starting it as a teenager, so it's hard for me to give you advice. But I would tell you I would tell you um, what's worked best with my kids is having frank conversations and leaving their future in their own hands. You know, what do you want? Do you want your son to do Quebec Online School until he's 16 and then that's it? Like, is your ultimate goal for him to have a high school diploma? Because it's likely that he's not going to go further than that if he's doing the minimum and doesn't care. Or do you want to take the chance that maybe he won't get his high school diploma, but maybe he's going to be motivated to change his path and start caring? And so you'll have to think about what you're kind of risking, because if he's doing the minimum now, that's better than than nothing. So maybe that's the best path for him, for your family, for what you're willing to to live with. um but maybe you can have a frank conversation with him and kind of talk about his options. And if you're willing to go there, like, I would not tell him that you're willing to support him in anything if you're not willing to support him with anything. You have to be ready for the fact that if you tell him, look, we're going to do it your way, because you're old enough to start making your own decisions, maybe he's going to say, I want to watch stupid shows on the internet for a month. And the worst that would happen is if you told him, look, I'm going to support you in what you want, and then you didn't, and then what he wanted was something you didn't want, and then you would force him to do like that. That is worse than just telling him to continue. So I would suggest read up on unschooling, on different approaches, and see how far you're willing to go, and then have frank conversations with your son about what his options in life are, and what you're willing to do to try to make things easier for him. But I often think that kids in that kind of situation, or in school, and this is nothing on you. This is not you. It's just a comparison. I feel that it makes me think about like prisoners, people in prison. And when a person is in prison and they don't want to be there, um, some people find constructive ways to, like, they get educated in prison and whatever, and they come out great. But some people are like, they're just fighting the prison. So they're using all their creativity to learn how to make shivs and how to melt plastic and how to get out of whatever and steal extra food at the canteen. And so, you know, do you want your child's creativity to be on how can I do the minimum required? Like, how can I mess with the system so that it doesn't ask too much of me? Or do you want it to be channeled somewhere else that might be more actualizing for him? So I can't answer that. I'm not saying unschooling is the best solution. I don't know what it is. I'm just saying, have conversations with your son, and maybe find out what he wants. And maybe there's a way to work around that. If he wants from a break from Quebec Online School for a month to consider his options, a month more or less isn't going to make a huge difference in his life. Not if it helps him find himself. So anyways, I'm not sure I helped, but Sorry.
Thank you, Noémi. Let's go from, there's a question on Facebook, actually. So let me read it. And then we have, after that, two questions on the Facebook Live
I'm here
too.
as long
So
as you want.
let's go for Facebook first. So the person is saying, um, how do we do for the families that cannot provide a French environment to our kids? Like, I love homeschooling, but I'm afraid that my son actually will lose the French if I homeschool.
So, um, so my daughter learned English because I set the iPad to English and she didn't know how to switch it. So I don't know how old your kids are, but there's ways to get them to do the French. So I find putting my children in life situations that forces them to work on things is the best way to get them to be motivated. So putting them in front of a workbook, they're like, I don't care about this workbook. Like, why should I have to fill it out? So they'll learn the French just to fill out the workbook, but will they learn the French long term and really retain it? I don't know. But send your kid to French summer camp. You know, go, they like gymnastics, put them in a French gymnastics program. They're going to have to communicate and learn how to communicate in order to do things. They're going to see what the use of learning French is because of the situation they're in. Now, I wouldn't put them in an activity they don't want to do, but find out something that they enjoy and say, go, but it has to be in French. I also think that the parent has to be comfortable. Like a parent that does unschooling because they feel like that's like fashionable, but they're super anxious and always worried, and communicating that anxiety to their kid is not the best way either. Like, if French for you is a deal breaker, well, maybe you do unschooling, but there has to be a French in that environment somehow. And then the discussion with your child is saying, how do we incorporate French into our lives? We can discuss, there's tons of different ways. Maybe it's a pen pal, maybe you play online games and you have to set them to French. There's tons of ways to be exposed to French, but we have to figure something, because that's kind of my deal breaker as a parent. Especially starting like that. You'll see probably over time that the deal breakers can, maybe your child will start getting into French activities or enjoying French anyways, and you'll be like, okay, then you're good, so I don't have to worry about that. Or maybe you realize that you're not that worried about your French and your child not learning French right away. One way or the other, you have to pace yourself as a parent too. Don't go overboard in unschooling right now because you've learned that you've seen this. Read up on it, think about what's going to happen when your kids do stuff you don't like, and how you're going to go live through that, and take your time to get there. There's no rush.
Thank you, Noémi. There's a question from Cynthia. I can read it. My daughter is 10, fifth grade with attention deficit disorder. We always need to work hard for her to remember any new notion from school. Your own schooling story is inspiring, but the idea of letting my struggling girl in charge of her own learning is terrifying. She's a bit of a rebel, and her reaction to any imposed work is similar to your son. But I'm so scared of failing her. She would not be able to catch up, unlike your son, if this was a bad move for her. So, what you're thinking about that?
Again, I mean, I have no crystal ball. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. Um, uh, I like having frank conversations with my kids about things when I'm not sure. I've had conversations as I was unschooling with my kids. Like my son, I would read and I'd say like, you know, mm, with unschoolers, or the studies show that they're really good on languages, but their math is not as good. It worries me about, if you don't do math, it's going to be hard to catch up later on. And once I had that conversation with him, and he kind of turned around, he said, like, I'm worried about that too. So actually he asked to do a little bit of math earlier. So like I said, on the 29th, he asked to do formal schooling, but he had asked to start math earlier than that. We would do math once in a while, just because he himself didn't feel like he was ready. So I think having conversations with kids about their future and being like kids want to fit into society. You know, why do kids learn how to walk? They learn how to walk because everybody else is walking and they feel like they're not going to stay sitting down when everybody else is walking. So I think there's a lot of show kids what real life is, bring them to work, bring them to other people's work, ask people to talk to your kids about how they struggle to get into whatever they need. Every time I go see a doctor, a dentist, any kind of professional with my kids, I always tell them I'm a homeschooler. Um, can you talk about how you became a doctor, or can you show us what you're doing? Explain what you're doing. Um, it might take a while. And maybe you want to keep doing what you're doing, but start having those conversations with your daughter and saying, like, you can tell her, look, I'd like to give you more freedom, but I'm also worried about these things. Like, what do you think? And having just letting the child thinking about the pros and cons, and showing that you care about what they think about their own education is already, I think, an amazing step. I'd be interested if there's unschoolers that have children with special needs, whether they have comments on that. Um, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, because there's another question that goes into this way, but is a bit different. We're talking about the regulation here.
Mhm.
And actually there's two questions about that, of course. So my son is 9 with functioning ESD and sounds a little like your son. Before the regulation, I unschool, but with the new regulation, I really don't know how to do it and still meet the requirements. And there's another question after that, which is about the same. How do you unschool and maintain the criteria required by the ministry right now?
So I find the advantage of unschooling is really I approach life and our kid as a team. So, I was talking about the fact that I respect my son's opinion, my son respects my opinion. So I go to my son and I talk to him about options. It's a little bit like crossing the street on the red light. If there's a ton of cars coming, I don't care how much liberty you want, you're not going to cross that street. But if you've developed a relationship of trust and respect, your kid is going to listen to you explain why you can't cross that street, and they'll understand and they'll buy in. So I do think it's hard to start that late. Like if you're starting unschooling now, it's easier for me because my kids and I have a track record of me giving advice and them learning that's my advice. When I bother to give it now, it's usually because I see something that they don't. And so they respect it more, and they'll listen to it more. Um, but if I had to start it now, I'd have a frank conversation with my son, and that's what I did 2 years ago when the dem just started. I said to my son, "Look, you can do everything that they want in the program and make everybody happy, except you." You can do the strict minimum required for the dem to be happy, and to leave us alone. In which case, and I'll help you figure out what it is we need to do the absolute strict minimum. Or you can do whatever you want, and I'm going to try to figure out what I can show to get people off our back, but I probably won't be able to if you don't do these things. And so we have to be ready. If I am not able to convince them that the things you do want to do are enough, then they may tell us we're not allowed to homeschool anymore. And they may force me to sign you up to school, and I may have to send you back to school. And if I have to send you back to school, I have to encourage you. Legally, I have to encourage you. I have to be there and support you. And I have to tell you to go to school. And I have to pack your lunch and buy you your uniform and buy your books. And I have to bring you to school. And I have to open the door. And you have to go into that door. I have to, or else we're in big trouble. But after that, if you don't want to listen, if you don't like, there's no one can control your hand. If you don't want to pick up the pen, if you want to walk out of the school and go to the park, I don't want you to do that. You can't do that. I can't support you in doing that because legally I can't. But if you end up doing it, at some point, Youth Protection Services is going to come to our house and start asking questions. Youth Protection Pro Services has the power to remove kids from home. But they're going to analyze and see, is it my fault as a parent because I'm not supporting you, which is never going to be the case. If I'm forced to send you to school, I am going to be the best schooling parent possible. I'm going to bring you to school and make sure that you go and do as best as you can. But if you convince the Youth Protection Services person that you don't want it to go to school and it's your fault, and no matter where they bring you, you're not going to go to school, then what are they going to do? They're going to put you as a dropout. There's risks if the Youth Protection Services comes. There's risks that they might see something, and like some people have gone through hell. I had this conversation with my son, and my son said, I don't want to talk to no lady. I don't want to talk to a lady who can remove us from my house. I'm going to go to school before I talk to a lady who could take us out of the house. I said, well, you don't have to go to school, but that means you need to do a minimum amount. Is that okay? Fine. So I don't know if your child is mature enough for you to have that kind of conversation. But again, it's not like when it's, you have to do it because I said so, or you have to do it because I think it's best for you, and you have to do it, then your kid is fighting against you. If it's, well, I strongly suggest you do it because look, the consequences are going to be horrible, and I don't know how I'm going to, I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. Like what am I going to do? Can you help me? Then it becomes much more, it's us against fighting against something else, and we're a team and we're trying to figure out the solution together to something. So I would encourage you to approach everything like that, whether it's the dem right now, but later on it's going to be like getting into CEGEP or getting a job, or, buying whatever toy or thing that they want. It's never yes or no because I said so. Oh, well, it's too expensive. No, it's not too expensive. How are we going to raise that money? What are your because I can't give that much money towards that toy. What can we do together? Do you want to make a lemonade stand, or do you have ideas about how you're going to raise money? Do you want to sell some of your toys? Let's make it a problem solving exercise with your child. Here are what the constraints are. Can you help me figure out how we're going to, the youth protection isn't going to go poof. So how are we going to solve this?
Thank you, Noémi. There's nothing in the chat, but there's actually another question from Facebook, an easy one. How do you make sure the kids socialize as new homeschoolers?
So
easy without the pandemic.
With the pandemic, it's not easy. The socialization, especially in our house, because we have asthma and I live with my mom, has been very much internet based. But the pandemic is going to be over, hopefully. And the socialization issue is a myth. Unless it's a pandemic. In homeschooling, there's no socialization issue. Especially in the big urban centers, there are homeschooling centers where families get together, rent space, and they do activities all day. There are across Quebec, and not everywhere in Quebec, but in the bigger centers, like in Estrie, in Montérégie, in Saint-Jérôme, near Quebec City, there are big homeschooling support groups. And these are families, they'll meet up at the park, they'll get together to go to the theater. The year before the pandemic, my daughter was busy 4 days a week with planned activities. She would go to the community center twice a week. She had, I think she had a gym. There was like a gym activity another day a week. And then I would trade with another homeschooling family who lived 5 blocks away from me. So one day, 1 week, the Wednesday, the kids would be at my house. The other week, the Wednesday, the kids would be at their house. It's really a village. What you've lived this year is nothing compared to what homeschooling is when there's no pandemic. It is a big family. My best friends are homeschoolers now. I've changed my will, and the people who will take care of my kids if my husband and I die are part of our homeschooling community. It is a very tightly knit group. And it's a group. I mean, the kids socialize, but what I find personally more enriching is the fact that I've talked to other families. If I had not seen other families unschool, I would never have thought to do it. I would never have considered doing it. Like, are you crazy? Are you smoking good pot? How does a highly educated person decide to leave it all up to their kids? It's nuts.
Thank you, Noémi. I see the time, and then we have a couple more questions, but it's already 15 to 10.
I don't mind staying till 10.
Okay, so there's a difficult question here. Why would the DPG ever come to someone's house? Why would they need to see, what would they need to see in order to remove someone's kids, actually?
Oh, it's really hard to say. It's look, the DPG is understaffed, undertrained, and under uh, informed about homeschooling. So it depends on the prejudices of the person coming to your house. So I would say the vast majority of DPG cases that I've heard about have ended up closing fairly quickly. So I've talked to a lot of stressed people that things got resolved after they talked to the DPG person once and it was fine. But every year there's one case that just goes off the rails. And there needs to be the conjunction of a school that is not that is upset at a parent enough to call youth protection services and say something nasty to youth protection services about you. You need to have the youth protection services person not be a great person, not be very open, not know anything about homeschooling, have prejudices against homeschooling. That's kind of the perfect storm of there's going to be a problem. And then you sometimes, I'm not saying it's all the time, but sometimes the parents are kind of uh really strongly attached to their rights and to what's right and the fact that you kind of have to stroke the youth protection services in the right way, and certain parents are better than others at it. So a parent who's kind of abrasive can exacerbate things, but I don't want to paint all parents in the same brush. I have seen very good parents who did everything that they could with just a youth protection person that was just not reasonable in my opinion. And and so it's I don't think the chances are big that things can go wrong with youth protection services, but when they go wrong, they go really wrong. And it's like, do you want to play with the matches with your children? It's like, what is your level of risk that you're willing to take on? I am not going to recommend to anybody to have youth protection come to your house. I'm saying it's a conversation you can have with your kids, and it can happen, but it's not something that I recommend.
Thank you, Noémi. There's also a question, but I don't know if there's one in English. Someone is asking, is there a teen group or something for homeschoolers? So I'm going to put the French one that I know.
The unschoolers?
I know for homeschooling, just a teen group.
Oh, a teen group for homeschooling. Yeah. There's,
I know the
I
French
don't
one,
know if there's an
gang
English one. If
d'ado.
someone knows. What I would suggest is go write the question on the AQED English Facebook group, because there might be people not listening tonight who are aware if there is one. Otherwise, I mean, you can always try to start one. And the homeschooling community is a self-starting community. Everything is started by a parent who had a need. So if you feel a need, well, you go ahead and fill it.
Yes, there's also a question which is a bit technical, so I don't know if you have something to say about it. Did someone saying like, what is the difference actually between opening a private school versus a learning center in Quebec? Does a learning center provide accreditation, or does one still need to homeschool? So doing all the damn paperwork and expectation.
Yeah, if you don't have a permit, a school permit from the government, you are a learning center or a community center. Then if a child goes to the community center, they are considered homeschoolers and they have to fill out the paperwork. And it's very hard to get accreditation. It's a whole big process. I know many families or many groups of parents who've tried to start private schools. The number of people who homeschool because they tried to create alternative schools is like astounding. There's tons of parents who would rather have had the school that they wanted than homeschool, but the school they wanted didn't exist. And they were not able to build it. Like I must know, in the 5 years, I must have seen like 3 or 4 family groups try to build an alternative school, and just the paperwork and the red tape for getting a school accredited is such that many of them just gave up and decided to homeschool.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Noémi. There's someone actually saying, "Oh, I really enjoyed this webinar. I hope I can talk to you. Reach out at another moment if I have more questions. Maybe can I reach out to you? Can I have your email address on the Facebook page or something?" So that
Listen,
means
I'm happy to do more
enjoy.
conferences, or I could do like a Facebook Live just answering questions. I prefer not doing one-on-one just because, I mean, we have 2,000 member families at AQED. And I used to answer everybody's requests when it was like that. And I used to do it all the time. And then I realized that I was not seeing my family anymore. So I decided to say no to anybody who wanted to talk to me privately, unless you're a personal friend. I love talking to you and I want to say yes, but it's just, if I say yes to you, then I can't justify saying no to anybody else. And then I had no family anymore. I was just talking to other homeschooling parents all the time.
And sorry.
But if you
I was
want to
going to
do,
say,
if a kid wants to do a Facebook Live thing, and then you want to ask me my question, the same question, we can have the same conversation as long as other parents can benefit from it at the same time. So I don't have to do it one-on-one with 2,000 people. I'll be happy to do that.
exactly. I was going to say, well, I think we have the answer because someone is saying in the conversation, well, we need more webinars with Noémi. So I think this is what we need to plan. So I think we're going to stop there because there's no more question that I see on Facebook and here. I just want to thank you very much, Noémi, again, for all your time. You spent the whole evening again with us tonight, 2 webinars, one in French and one in English. Thank you very much. It was awesome. It was great. It's so interesting. I've heard this story many times, and every time I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. And every time it makes us question. So yeah, thank you very much. And then
My pleasure.
we might do something else because we still have some room in June. So we'll see.
I'm here, so anytime.
Excellent. Noémi said that if you have any question, you can write them on Facebook.
Yeah.
She's going to have a look there and she's going to answer if there's anything that she can. And I hope we'll see all of you next week because we're going to have our other conference next week with Catherine Léger.
And she's great.
She's
I
great.
highly recommend it.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. I'm going to close this webinar right now. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, Emily. Good night.
Bye.